I'll never forget the night it happened. It was one of those evenings when New York feels like a living thing, slick streets reflecting the city lights, every cab's horn blending into a constant hum. Inside the Rosemont Club, the city's most exclusive restaurant, everything was still. Conversations were soft, smiles were practiced, and the air smelled faintly of truffle and money. I'd worked there for almost 2 years, moving between tables like I was part of the furniture. In places like that, invisibility isn't just a side effect, it's the job. Smile, serve, disappear. My name's Naomi Brooks. Most people who dined there never learned it. But I wasn't always a waitress. Before all this, I'd been halfway through my PhD in economics in Berlin, fluent in German, working on research about how clean water technology could change labor productivity in struggling economies. My father, Dr. Michael Brooks, had developed a groundbreaking water filtration system. He believed it could save millions of lives, and then one man tore it all away. That man was Victor Langford, a billionaire investor with a face that belonged on the cover of Forbes and a reputation for restructuring companies' code for bleeding them dry. 3 years ago, his firm took over my father's company. Within months, my father's health collapsed. He had a stroke a week after signing papers he'd been cornered into signing. I dropped my studies and came home to take care of him. Nights at the Rosemont were just how I kept the lights on. That night I was covering the VIP section. I didn't know at first he'd be there, but when the revolving door spun open, I felt the air shift. Langford walked in like he owned the building, tailored suit, salt and pepper haircut, like it cost more than my monthly rent. Behind him was his young associate, Jake Porter, the type who laughs at every one of the boss's jokes. They didn't even look at me when they sat down. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said with my usual warmth that wasn't too warm, still sparkling water. Jake nodded without looking up. 2 bottles of SP, and that was that. I set down menus, gave the specials, kept my face neutral. But as I came back with their bread basket, I heard it the shift in tone. They'd slipped into German. I didn't flinch, didn't let on. I understood every word. Langford was talking about a takeover deal, like he was describing the weather. Cut half the staff, keep the patents, flip the division in 3 weeks. And then, my father's project came up. Northwind was my masterpiece, Langford said in German, swirling his wine. The old man bought every line we fed him, believed it was failing in 5 years, signed right where we wanted. Jake chuckled, adding, "Ethics don't pay the bills." Then Langford, he glanced at me like I was an empty chair and said, "Look at her, probably thinking about tip money for rent." Goldfish brain. I kept pouring the Petrus he'd ordered, steady as a surgeon. But inside, every muscle was locked. My father's face flashed in my mind, reading me German poetry, teaching me how to calculate risk like it was a game. The man they were mocking had been my anchor, and this smug shark thought he could use my language, my father's language, as a wall I couldn't climb. When their steaks came out, I set the plates down and didn't step back. Langford looked up. "Is there a problem?" His voice was in English now, sharp. I took a slow breath, and in perfect academic German I said, "Yes, there is. And by the way, the genitive of goldfish is de Goldfisch. If you're going to insult someone in a language, at least get it right." The room went dead silent. Jake froze mid-chew. Langford's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone in an apron. I didn't switch to English. I told him who I was. Naomi Brooks, daughter of Dr. Michael Brooks. And I told him I knew exactly what Northwind was, how it was built on manufactured panic, falsified reports, and the deliberate destruction of a scientist's work. "You didn't just take his company," I said quietly. "You broke his spirit." Langford's face flushed purple. "You're fired," he snapped, turning to look for the manager. But before he could even point Marcus, my manager was already there. He stood beside me like a wall. "Mr. Langford in my establishment. I don't let guests abuse my staff. If anyone's leaving, it's you." A murmur rippled through the dining room. Langford stood, threw a wad of cash on the table, and stormed out with Jake trailing behind him. The door closed, and for the first time in months, I felt my shoulders loosen. What I didn't know was that a journalist named Claire Daniels had been sitting near the window that night. She didn't speak German, but she saw the shift the power change hands. The next morning, the headline was everywhere: the billionaire and the waitress who spoke his language. My name wasn't in it, but the code words were: Northwind Brooks falsified report. By 9 a.m., Langford's PR team was in full damage control. By noon, Phoenix Capital's CEO, Daniel Cho, had sent me an email. "I was impressed by your composure and conviction last night. I run an initiative that invests in ethical tech. If you're interested, my door is open." 2 weeks later, I was in his office looking at the framework for the Ethical Futures Initiative. Daniel didn't want me for a headline, he wanted my brain. My first mission: try to buy back the water filtration patents Langford's firm still held. It wasn't glamorous work. Meetings with banks, negotiations with shell companies, legal clauses that made my head pound. But 3 months later, we got them, every last patent. We put them into a public trust, free to nonprofits, cheap to struggling towns. The first pilot was in a small coastal county, still recovering from a hurricane. I stood by as local technicians installed the filters in schools, making sure they had manuals in their own language parts they could source themselves. The day the first tap ran clear, I stepped back and let them open it. That was their moment. Meanwhile, the investigation into Langford's firm heated up. His associate Jake lost his job, and the scientist who'd signed the fake report agreed to cooperate. Langford stepped down temporarily, which everyone knew meant the beginning of the end. Then one afternoon, I got an email from Jake. "I know I have no right to ask, but could we meet?" Against my better judgment, I said yes. He showed up looking like life had chewed him up, no suit, no smirk. "I knew Northwind was dirty," he admitted. "I wanted to be him. Now I just want to do something useful." I didn't forgive him, but I told him about a small water coalition that needed someone to manage supply chains for parts, unpaid glory, but real work. "If you want to go. Don't tell them who you were. Just do the job." A few weeks later, a friend texted me. "Saw a new name at the coalition. Thought you'd want to know." I didn't ask. I just replied, "Good." Exactly 1 month after that night at the Rosemont, I went back this time through the front door. Marcus greeted me like an old friend. My server was a young woman named Elise Hands, just a little shaky as she wrote my order. I left her a note with the tip: "Your breath guides your hands. Your hands guide the floor." Walking out, I glanced at the marble statue by the entrance. I'd once wondered what stories it would tell if it could talk. Now I didn't need it to. My story had already left that room, poured into trust documents running through school taps carried quietly by people who'd never know my name. And here's the thing, this wasn't about revenge. It was about building locks, so the next time someone like Langford came along the door to destruction wouldn't even open. If you were in my position, knowing the truth, holding it in your hands, would you risk everything to speak it out loud? Or would you keep your head down, stay invisible, and survive? Tell me in the comments, because that's a question worth arguing about.